All right. Well, welcome to episode 2 of the Luke Marchesani show. That is me. This show is about culture, aesthetics, philosophy, and design. Presented by Grid Lab. Grid Lab, that is my company. I don't think I have anything Grid Lab branded except on the wall there, which you can't see, but the sticky story of Grid Lab is to unlock the genius within humanity, as a pun. Okay, apologies, my chair is a little squeaky. I am at my desk today. As you can see, I got some books. I got my iPad. We're going to break out the iPad today, do some drawing as a sort of proverbial whiteboard, so to speak. And let's hope that this thing doesn't keep squeaking all day. Last week, episode 1, we talked about the novel, one of the greatest novels of all time, Anna Karenina, and you can watch that here. It's nowhere to be found, but you can watch it here. You know where to find it. Hour-long review, could have been longer, but I really think we got onto some good themes, some good ideas, and I actually want to transition a little bit, but pull on some of those themes. We talked about really at the end of the book, the idea of the good. And so the good is where I want to pick up on today. The good is this thing that I think we're all longing for. And I remember a few weeks ago, I was driving back from a coffee shop, listening to music in my car, but in nature. I'd just gotten some good work done, and I texted my friend 2 words, simple. I just said, "the feeling." And him and I, we go way back. We're both kind of artists, thinkers, philosophers, feelers. Much like I would assume some of you, if you're tuning into this podcast on aesthetics, culture, philosophy, design. I just texted him the feeling. And I think he responded like, nothing like it. Nothing quite like it, right? But what is the feeling? What is the feeling? It is an encounter with the good. Okay, that's kind of one of the ways that I want to describe it. And similarly, maybe a few months ago, I was driving home, and I was on kind of the main interstate. Sun is setting to my left, beautiful sky. Again, I'm listening to music. To my right is this massive tree farm. Just the way the clouds are shaping up, the way the light is hitting the trees. I'm encountered with, grasped by that feeling. Again, the good. And what I've come to what I want to say is, in these moments, it's really hard to describe that feeling, right? That's why saying the feeling is perhaps the best way to describe it. And so, but like a good philosopher, I'm thinking, well, guys, people, writers, thinkers throughout all of the ages, they experience this. They experience this feeling of experiencing a phenomenon, yet maybe not having language for it. I'm like, that's how we come up with new ideas, right? That's the whole experiential linguistic process, right? Where something happens or an object exists or is created, but we don't have words for it. Words are just corresponding sounds with almost arbitrary meaning that translate something in the physical world into something in the conceptual world that we can, use like this psychotechnology of language to communicate about it and to have a shared understanding, right? So I'm like, I gotta come up with my own concept for this because it's so prevalent. I experience this feeling so often in my life. And what I came up with it was just the idea of the imaginary world. The imaginary world. And I'm going to go to the iPad in a few minutes to kind of try to draw this out and visualize it a little bit. But the imaginary world is, and again, for those of you listening, it will be better eventually for you to watch the video, but I'm going to try to describe it in words as well, and so that you can understand it. And I'm also, again, picking up on the hermeneutics of three, which is an idea that I presented in the first episode. The hermeneutics of three is just sort of a combat to dualism. It's sort of the middle way from Buddhism. It's sort of the Aufhebung. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but the idea within Hegel's dialectics that actually the two opposite sides, right? The common language now that we use to describe it is thesis, antithesis, or antithesis, synthesis, right? So on one side is an idea, on the other side is the opposite idea, and then in the middle is the Aufhebung, which is the synthesis, but he never really used that language. He used that German word, which is translated sublate, right? And it's the mutual adding and destruction of two parties into one, right? And it's this higher truth. It's kind of like the higher law phenomenon, where you have, say, two opposites, but they're actually united by the same root idea. So let's take symmetry and asymmetry, right? Symmetry it's the same on both sides. It's like a mirror image. Asymmetry literally means not symmetrical. But both of these ideas in design are actually serving one grand higher law, one bigger idea that unites them both, which is balance, right? And so it's the hermeneutics of three is taking into account that not everything is bipartisan, right? That there is a complexity, that the golden mean, right? That there's this balance between excess and scarcity that's somewhere in between the two opposites. So it's a hermeneutics of three to get to that Aufhebung, that sublation, that synthesis, that higher truth going on. And so, speaking of three, what I'm going to bring in is not just the imaginary world as one world, but the imaginary world as a world within three worlds. Okay, and this is pretty abstract right now, but we'll get into some practicals perhaps. I don't really like practicals, but people tell me that they're moderately important. And so, the theory of the three worlds is that in the middle is the imaginary world. Okay, it's this liminal state. It's not the liminal state, it is a liminal state between all the way on the side closest to reality is the real world. Okay, then all the way on the other side is the dream world. And the imaginary world is this world in between that bridges the gap between quick LaCroix sip, by the way. We're not sponsored by LaCroix yet, but we will be soon. Just need to cleanse the vocal cords. There we go. Much better. So the imaginary world, it bridges the real world and the dream world. And in this imaginary world, it is not necessarily real, right? It's not necessarily a dream. It's as if a dream is happening in reality. It's the sublation of the two extremities, right? And so I wanna kind of try to diagram this out using my iPad, but before that, I want to just give a little bit of another thinker's ideas and thoughts about this before I kind of just delve into my philosophical ponderings. So the feeling that I described, I describe this feeling sort of as wonder, right? Is being encompassed, engrossed by the good. When you're experiencing the good, you're experiencing the imaginary world, which is this place that doesn't quite exist, but it's calling to you, right? And I have this book, Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis, I've been reading, and he kind of describes this feeling of wonder as joy. That's kind of the language he uses for it. I just want to read a quote by him to kind of start us off into understanding the good, understanding wonder, understanding this other world, this imaginary world that I'm going to describe a little bit more in my theory of the three worlds. And so, as I said, he calls it joy, and he describes it this way. He says, "It is difficult to find words strong enough for the sensation which came over me. Milton's enormous bliss of Eden, giving the full ancient meaning to enormous, comes somewhere near it. It was a sensation, of course, of desire, but desire for what? Not certainly for a biscuit tin filled with moss, or even, though that came into it, for my own past. Oh, I desire too much. And before I knew what I desired, the desire itself was gone, the whole glimpse withdrawn, the whole world turned commonplace again, or only stirred by a longing for the longing that had just ceased. It had taken only a moment of time, and in a certain sense, everything else that had ever happened to me was insignificant in comparison." So what he's describing here is one of the moments where he encountered joy as a young child. And it was when his brother brought this biscuit tin filled with and covered with moss. And he was trying to kind of elicit this world that he was building. And C.S. Lewis is describing the memory of his brother bringing that to him. And it wasn't the biscuit tin itself, it was what it represented. It represented this other world. It represented this place that was full of good and full of wonder. And so he goes on to describe it further. He says, "There was the same surprise and the same sense of incalculable importance. It was something quite different from ordinary life and even from ordinary pleasure. Something, as they would now say, quote, in another dimension." Okay? And so he describes several experiences where he experiences joy, where he's awakened to this other world, to this goodness that we're kind of describing. And I love just how he describes it, that it's this longing, right? And it made everything else that he'd experienced feel insignificant in comparison to this feeling that he had, this experience, this transcendent like awakening, to something beyond. And again, it's very hard to describe. It's almost ineffable. But for better or for worse, I'm going to try to describe it. So in order to describe the theory of the three worlds in greater detail, I am going to head over to the iPad, okay? You will see coming up on your screen very quickly here my actual iPad. Okay, so I'm trying something out here as a creative, clever concept so you can see what I'm working on. So, as we said, in the middle is what we have that I'm calling the imaginary world. Okay? Then, on the right side, we have the real world. Then on the left side, we have the dream world. Okay? And the imaginary world is the world, like we said. Well, actually, let's go to the real world first. The real world is where we have consciousness. Okay, and then the dream world is where we have subconsciousness. Okay, the imaginary world is where we have the semi-consciousness. Okay, the real world is when you're awake, right? And the dream world is when you're asleep. But the imaginary world is when you're daydreaming. Okay, I could probably do this all day. A few more kind of trichotomies, as it were, is the real world over here is when your eyes are open. The dream world is when your eyes are closed. And the imaginary world is when you're seeing double, as I call it. But what I really want to emphasize, actually, let's go over a few more because it's pretty fun. In the dream world, you have archetypes, right? These personality dimensions embedded in our collective unconsciousness, subconsciousness, or unconsciousness. In the real world, you have versions, right? The infinite permutations of the archetypes. But in the imaginary world, you're kind of getting into, like I said, this liminal state between reality and dream, where everything is, it's not quite fuzzy. It's actually, things are fuzzier yet clearer at the same time. And what I want to put in this middle section here as the big headers is that this is where we experience art, myth, and memory. Right? Some people maybe have called this the mind's eye, which I'm not stoked about, but it's an okay conceptualization to help us understand. So this is where we experience art, myth, and memory. It's in the imaginary world. It's in the semi-conscious, right? And this is even where I think we experience this future planning. I think events, right? Your schedule, things coming up are having an effect upon your semi-consciousness, right? If I know that I have dinner tonight with my friends at 9 p.m., silly example, that is having an effect upon my semi-consciousness that if I wasn't having dinner, it would be having a different effect. But I'm not fully aware of it in my consciousness throughout my day while I'm working, but I'm not fully unaware of it. I'm not asleep to it. And so the semi-conscious is where we're kind of tapping into this thing that's greater than ourselves, right? You're tapping into the future, you're tapping into the past here. And this is how we experience art. It brings us into the imaginary world. Myth or story brings us into the imaginary world. It engages our imagination. Memory engages our imagination, engages our mind's eye, engages this ability to see double, to daydream, to engage the semi-conscious. And it bridges, like I said, the real world and the dream world. And my theory, really, I'm saying this for the first time, but is that we were made for the imaginary world. The imaginary world is actually the world that existed at the beginning of time, according to a Christian theological tradition, and will exist again at the end of time. It's heaven in some ways. It's the place where, as God, once he created the world before any evil, before sin, before darkness entered, he described it all as good and as very good. There was a wholeness, right? There was a beauty, a pervading goodness, peace, or as the Bible would call it, shalom, in ease, right? There was no shame, there was no lack, there was no striving. There was just goodness and wonder and light and love, right? But now, as we experience the world, something's gone awry, something's gone amiss. We're in this liminal state between the original good and the ultimate good. The ultimate good, I think, is again a return of this wonder, this beauty, this goodness that's described at the end of the scriptures in Revelation 20, 21. And I encourage you to read that. It's some of the most beautiful words ever written. And it talks about the old order has passed away. Then behold, a new order has come. There's no more crying. There's no more sadness. And there is light, and all is back to goodness, right? And we find ourselves in this transition zone nowadays of that liminal state, right? It's liminal from the real world to the dream world, right? But it's also liminal from the original good and the ultimate good. And what it is it's a glimpse of the good. That's what wonder is. That's what the imaginary world is. Okay? And so I want to just stop here and give you a chance to reflect upon moments where you've encountered the good, where you've encountered wonder. Perhaps it's in nature. Perhaps it is, like we said, listening to music, experiencing art, maybe watching a movie, or maybe a situation that I just had that I think perfectly encapsulated was driving on a road trip. And my sister and I, a couple months ago, we drove on a road trip and we saw this name for this town on one of the road, the signs on the side of the road, and we were like, that is so good. That's such a sick name. But we couldn't remember it, and we were just going on a road trip this past weekend, same route, and we were trying to remember the name of this town on this sign. And we finally drove by it, and the name of the town was Malabar. And just that Malabar was an invitation to the good. It transported me. It transcended this real world, the Malabar. It's so good, right? It brought me into the imaginary world. What is Malabar? Where, like, it's beyond, the tangible and the graspable. And it's echoes of a better reality, a better world. And so I encourage you to just think, what in your life, what moments, what experiences, what art, what myth, what words themselves have transported you, given you a glimpse of the good, right? And whether or not you believe in good and evil or the ultimate, meta-narrative of the Christian story, I think it's inarguable that we all experience this desire for more, this transcendent experience of wonder, of the good, of the imaginary world. It is real. It's tangible in these moments, right? And as C.S. Lewis goes on to describe it, he says, it is that of an unsatisfied desire, which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. Anyone who has experienced it will want it again. I doubt whether anyone who has tasted it would ever, if both were in his power, exchange it for all the pleasures of the world. So it is this feeling of almost of being home, right? That is better than any feeling, any pleasure in the entire world, as C.S. Lewis posits. So let's go back to the iPad. I just want to draw this out in one other way to try to kind of get us to understand and see how we can experience this and how we can apply it maybe to our lives in a practical sense. So if we kind of have those three worlds, right, I want to describe it now with a drawing of a person, right? So here's a person, okay, and they have their eyes right here, and what we have is the visual plane, right? As most of us experience, we see the world around us, and that is what we're seeing is quote unquote the real world, right? But all of us have this ability to see double, right? When you think about the past, when you imagine something, when you use your imagination, you can be looking at the real world, right? That's what your eyes are seeing, but you can be seeing something within your mental or your mind's eye. You can be seeing two things almost at once. It's almost like the real world becomes blurry. It goes out of focus, and then into focus comes what's within your imagination. And so the imaginary world exists here, right? You can see things, you can see the past, but it still is a little bit blurry, right? It's like an impressionistic painting. But this imaginary world here is how we begin to transform the real world, okay? And that's really the application. We'll get to that in in 1 second. But within the depths of your entire being, right, is this collective unconsciousness, is the dream world, and this idea that what is deeply embedded and deep in almost deep darkness comes out oftentimes in and influences this and determines what you see, determines what you're programmed to see, right? And in many ways as well, what you see in the real world and in art and myth and memory comes back into here, and it's almost like this strange loop, right? And I haven't really even conceptualized it in that way. But I want us to understand this power that we all have. And this will be really the final kind of call to action. And I'll close off this iPad. What I want us to understand is that we all have the power to imagine. And we can use our imagination for good or for evil. But to imagine is to envision a better world. A world where the good is more real, is more apparent, right? And we all have these kind of, I call them translation mediums, or artistic mediums. Yours might be music. Yours might be design, photography, videography. It might be architecture. It might even be accounting and language or business, right? You know, I'm podcasting right now. I'm speaking. I'm using words. And we have these translation mediums, and they're all opportunities to bring a glimpse of the good into the world, right? To translate something from the invisible to the visible and to imbue the real world with the good. And ironically, that is exactly where we ended the last podcast episode with Levin from Anna Karenina, where he realized that though he might still be upset, though he might still get angry, though things might still go wrong for him, he has now this opportunity to imbue the good into the world, to imbue his life with the good, to be aware of something bigger than himself. And that's the idea of the theory of the three worlds, right? Is that this liminal state that we find ourselves in, this these moments, these glimpses of the good are calling to us from another world and saying, there's more, come, right? Come. And then when we can experience that beauty and translate it into the world, we can make it more known to others that there is goodness, that there is hope, that there is life, that there is wonder, right? And so that's kind of my encouragement to all of us is to trust our imagination, to trust the place where thought and ideas originate, and to move them into a form of reality through a translation medium, and to share it with the world, and to give them some vision of the good, of this place that we're all longing for, this place of home, the original good and the ultimate good, enveloping everything at eventually at one point in time. And so that's the idea of the theory of the three worlds. I hope maybe it changes. It gives you a grid, no pun intended, actually pun intended, because my business is called Grid Lab. But it gives you a grid for how to see different experiences and how to move those experiences into knowledge, understanding, and action, so that our skills, our gifts, our mediums can make the world a better place. And so thank you again to LaCroix, who is not yet our sponsor, but will be one day. And stay tuned for episode 3, which will be on a title to be determined. Have a great day.